Well, I guess I should let you know who I am and why I'm here today. I am a graduate of Oyster School from June of 1962. I started kindergarten here in 1955. Now, the background of all of this is that the year I started at Oyster School, and it was a different building back then, the year I started was the year in which the first black children were allowed to go here. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled a year earlier, in 1954, that schools for black kids, public schools for black children and public schools for white children was unconstitutional. And the reason for that is that from the beginning of America, before we even were a country, before we were the United States, back when we were colonies under Britain, under slavery, which was the way black people came to America, under slavery, slaves were not encouraged to learn. Some did, but by and large, they were discouraged. And then as time went on, when this became the United States, it became the law. In several states, it became a law. Educating a slave would be punishable. And so when the Civil War came and went, now we have 4 million black people who were just freed, and they don't have an education, they don't know how to read, and so forth. And so there were attempts to educate black children. The downside, however, was that their education was always inferior. The bottom line was the southern states were not educating black children. The schools were dilapidated, they were falling down. The teachers were not the best. The equipment was not the best. The children, they got hand-me-down books and supplies from the white schools, books that had been torn up and obsolete and this, that, and the other. They didn't have extracurricular activities. They didn't have music or dance or libraries, you name it. They just didn't have. So I started here in 1955 at the beginning of black children coming to Oyster. There were only about 4 of us. There were 2 girls in the 6th grade. There was another boy I didn't even know about who was in my, I was in the morning kindergarten class. He was in the afternoon kindergarten class, so we never saw each other. But then the next year in 1st grade, he was gone. So I didn't even know he was here until about 10 years ago when my kindergarten teacher, who was still alive, she and I used to meet and have lunch together and go to tea and things. And she showed me a class picture of the afternoon class, and there was this black boy in there, and I looked and I asked, who's he? You know, because I'd never seen him. He didn't come back. I was the first one to go all the way through from kindergarten to graduation, 1955 to 1962. I would say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, and in the Pledge of Allegiance it says liberty, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's a paraphrase. Probably didn't nail it, but liberty and justice for all. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If I went down to Alabama or even across the river into Virginia, which is part of the old Confederacy, I would not be treated equally. And so I'm saying this pledge, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, that's not exactly the way it is. And so that created doubt in my mind about what is said about American freedom and what is practiced. I began at a young age, and because it wasn't happening here at Oyster. At Oyster, The school was predominantly white. The largest minority were Asian kids, although they were treated as white, and that kind of, I thought, wait a minute here, I know better than that. And that sort of made me a little resentful, knowing that see, when you were white, you could go places. It was like having a passport. If you were white, it's like having a passport. You wouldn't be denied going to, like hotels, amusement parks, swimming pools, you name it, restaurants. It was like having a passport and a visa. If you're black, it's like, you're not a full citizen. You can't go here, you can't do this, you can't. And so it wasn't just that I was, in most cases, the only black kid in my classroom, and we all treated each other as one. We were like that. But what irked me was, I knew that the Asian kids, although they are not white, they're treated as white, which means they have the privilege I don't have. So that made me feel a little different. In 1957, when I was in the second grade, a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas, called Central High School, was ordered to desegregate a high school. The Supreme Court had ruled in 1954 that it was illegal, unconstitutional to have schools for black children and schools for white children. And 3 years had gone by, and Little Rock, Arkansas had not complied with what the Supreme Court said. So back then the president's name was Dwight Eisenhower. The governor of Arkansas's name was Orville Faubus. And he told the president, I cannot allow this school to be desegregated. It would cause a lot of violence. And so I'm going to bring in the National Guard of Arkansas to prevent the school from being desegregated. And so there was a standoff, and President Eisenhower finally said, you are going to follow what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said you're going to desegregate this school, and I will send in the army to make it happen. And all over TV, I saw these angry white students screaming and yelling and spitting on the black kids and throwing rocks and bottles at them and all kinds of destruction. And it was very, very traumatic. I was in the second grade, and I thought that if this is the way they are down in the southern states, and here where I'm going to school at Oyster, we all get along. I don't want to be a part of that. It's just too dangerous. And so this is the backdrop. I'm just giving you a flavor of what it was like when I started school. There were 2 Hispanic children in my school when I started, and they were Mexican Americans, and that was it. But the Hispanic population didn't begin until coming to the school until I'd say the 60s. The 1960s is when Hispanic kids came, and as you all know, of course, it's bilingual today.
You mentioned as a child always wanting to get an education. Was there any dream job that you ever had?
No, I didn't. I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I remember when I was, I think in the maybe the 5th grade, somebody came to school from the outside and went through the classroom and asked each one of us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when it came to me, I didn't know what to say. And I was thinking the Panamanian embassy is right across the street. So I said, an ambassador or a diplomat. I said something like that. But I just said it because it was just something to say. It was the only thing that popped up in my head. But to be honest with you, I did not. It wasn't until really when I was in college, one of my cousins worked for the State Department, and he showed me an article that he had written, and I had never seen an author before. And so there's the title of his article. He showed me the article and the title of the article, and it said by O.H. Laster. That was my cousin's name. And I saw his name in black and white, and I thought, wow, that's kind of neat, having a byline. So I thought, well, maybe I'd like to be a writer. But it didn't, and the thing in a way, I envy people, young people who know what they want to be. They're inspired. They see somebody like a singer or something. It's like, I want to be up on the stage. I want to sing. I want to, be a fireman or a teacher or go into politics. I didn't know what I wanted to be. Thank you.
One of my questions is, what did Oyster look like at that time?
Pardon me?
What did Oyster look like at that time?
It didn't look anything like this. This school was built 24 years ago in 2000. The school that I was in was built in 1925, and I brought, if you look at the exhibit downstairs, you'll see a photograph, an old photograph of the school. That's the way it looked when I was here. It looked nothing like this. See, where we are right now, this used to be the playground for the kids, kindergarten, first, second, third. This right here was the playground, and the school was where those condos are. That's where the school was, and then there was a playground on the other side of that. So no, it didn't look anything like it at all. Nothing like it at all.
So big changes.
Big changes, big changes. Yeah.
How would your experience at Oyster have changed if you didn't have the progressive black teachers you said you had?
Well, it made, it would have been harder. The two toughest teachers, there was a teacher named Finkel, 4th grade, and I was terrified of her. I did not want to be in her class. I didn't get her, but I got what was probably the worst teacher, the head teacher in 4th grade. But when I started here in kindergarten, what I forgot to mention was when the schools were desegregated, when the Supreme Court said that black and white schools were unconstitutional, not only were black children allowed to go to the white schools to get a better education, but every white school had to have a black teacher or a black librarian or some black professional. So when I started here, there was a black teacher. Her name was Betty Brooks. She had taught at a school called Green Acres in Bethesda. She took a civil service exam that's a government exam to get the government. And back then, DC didn't have a mayor. We didn't have a mayor. We didn't have a city council. We had 3 men running the city. They were called commissioners. The president picked them. And back then, if you worked for the DC government, it was the same as working for the federal government. It was all the same. And so Betty Brooks took an exam to be, she was a teacher, but she took an exam to be in the DC school system. And the principal who picked her, who was my principal, a woman named Florence Cornell, said, come in for an interview. And so Miss Brooks came in for an interview, and she got the job. She was my kindergarten teacher. She was very forward-thinking. She made she made us want to come to school. And she had, I was one of the better readers, and I was put in a group called, we had 2 groups, one group called Cardinals and the other group called Blue Jays, after the birds. And I was in one of those 2 groups. I can't remember which, but I was one of the better readers. As I said, my mother had homeschooled me before I started at Oyster. And so having Miss Brooks with her, she was the head of the Glee Club. She took us on field trips, not as many as you go on now, but she baked every Friday. You could smell something baking in the hallways, because she baked every Friday, pie, cake, whatever. And she had us put little paper links that we glued together and to make a chain. We had a Christmas tree out on the playground and strung it with popcorn and these little links so the birds could come and eat the popcorn and all. But Miss Brooks, she was very progressive. The next black teacher I had in 1959, her name was Virginia Moss Morgan. She had us do a term paper to graduate. When I graduated from the 6th grade, had to write a term paper, otherwise I wouldn't graduate. And I had to have footnotes just as if I were in college. And she was progressive too. Matter of fact, she gave me a pep talk. See, back then, of course, teachers can't, since the schools are supposed to be equal, white and black, because she was a black teacher didn't mean she was supposed to show me any preference. But one day she asked me to stay behind. It was like just before lunch. She said, "Earl, I want to see you at 3 o'clock." And I thought, what have I done? And I thought, what? And so, as you know, just before 3 o'clock, and the kids are lining up to putting their coats on and they're getting ready to go home, and I'm looking at the clock, and now the clock says 3. Back then we got off at 3, not 3:15. And so I'm wondering, what? And so she walks over to my desk and she says to me, "You know, your grades have been slipping, and I know you can do better than this." And she was talking about one grade. She said, like, "You've dropped to a B+, and I know you can do better." And she said, "You know, if you don't turn this around, you know, your buddies, your white friends, they're going to be ahead of you, even the ones who aren't as smart as you. The ones who are not as smart as you, their parents are going to take care of them when they get grown, when they start school. They have their parents to fall back on, and their parents are going to take care of that. You don't have that luxury. And you know, whatever it is, you need to snap out of it." So, you know, she did it after hours. She couldn't show favoritism to me in the classroom because, you know, that's bias. You know, just because she's a black teacher and I'm black, she can't show that she favors me over the white kids. You know, and I was a teacher myself, and I know that doesn't, you know, you'll get in a lot of trouble doing that. But she gave me a little words. She gave me words of wisdom, and then when I got older, I did see some of the kids I went to high school with, who were worse. You know, they weren't great students, but their father owned some company, or, you know, or this, that, or the other, and they're millionaires. You know, it was what my teacher told me was true. Typical. What grade? What grade you taking?
Let's go first grade.
Oh, first grade, learning how to count, learning how to add. The teacher had a clock, it wasn't a real clock, but she had a cutout of a clock with hands on it, and, you know, like learning where's 3 o'clock, where's 2 o'clock, where's 1 o'clock. One time she asked me, "Earl, show 3:15. And I thought, I don't know where that is on the clock, because when I thought of a quarter, I thought of 25 cents. And she said, "Show me 3:15. And I was confused over whether it would be 25 minutes after 3 or 15 minutes after 3, and then the bell rang, and I didn't have to answer the question.
Did you have a favorite class?
Favorite, I'd say kindergarten was just dynamite. Kindergarten, first grade, it was just a joy to come to school. Miss Brooks made learning so easy and made me wanna, made all of us wanna come. And she was young, she was only about 25 years old. See, the other teachers, a lot of them were older, but she was young. She was young. And I think that had something to do with it. It was almost kind of like, I could relate to her like relating to my mother, wherein the other people, the other teachers, they were older, and they were white too. So that was about the closest thing. That sort of eased me into the school a little better. Was that she, and I think she was the only one with a master's degree, I believe. believe. I could be wrong, but yeah.
How did the students' parents treat you?
Well, see, I lived in the neighborhood almost a year before I started Oyster. I lived in Calorama Triangle. We moved in Calorama Triangle in December of '54. I started here in September of '55, like 9 months later. And so we were already pals for that period. And I would go over to their house for like birthday parties and eat dinner. And they'd come over to my place and do the same, eat dinner. We'd go out to the movies together. We'd go to the zoo together. We'd go to the circus together, the theater, the movies. We all knew each other. So it was like I'm going to school from kids in my neighborhood and kids from here in Woodley Park. And so we all knew each other, the parents. Now, one thing, you mentioned parents. I'm shifting a little bit, but my parents belong to the PTA. Now I think it's called the PTO. Is that what they call it now?
It's actually
Parent
called,
teacher.
Yeah, we call it the OCC. But
OCC.
It's the Oyster Community Council.
Okay.
Something
Well,
like that.
my parents belonged to that type of organization, so they volunteered. My mother spoke French, and so we had French speaking children and parents here. My mother would, as a volunteer in the health department, she would translate what the kids were saying or what the parents were saying, or so the fact that my mother was a volunteer, she was a volunteer substitute teacher, my dad volunteered, so my parents' presence was here, and the parents respected that. The parents respected my parents, and that made it easier for me to go through the school. Just the mutual respect. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Great
Thank
question.
you.
Okay,
Great
sure, you're
question.
welcome.
I think that's about all the time we
That's
have for
it?
questions.
That's it.